Tonight, the Albanese government embarrassed by two of its former prime ministers. Kevin Rudd fights for his job, but his alleged Republican friends won't help him. And Paul Keating hides his face as he meets China's foreign minister in a Chinese bid to split the government. He should be embarrassed given what he then said. And more warnings that we're killing our own gas supplies, causing gas shortages for winter. Blame our global warming madness. But a new film on this warming scare premiered today, starring some of the world's top climate experts who say the facts show global warming is a fake crisis.
They don't support any of these claims.
I'll talk to the director of that film that's going to cause big waves. Plus, Foreign Minister Penny Wong warned Israel not to attack any hospitals in Gaza, but look what it found this week when it did. Much more tonight, including Barnaby Joyce, my book tip of the week, a cookbook this time. Might even tell you about this miracle machine. And Independent MP Dai Lee will be along on why a former Labor giant sick of Labor is sponsoring her instead. But first, I'm not actually going to start tonight with what you might expect, the shock unemployment figures today, maybe the astonishing immigration ones, or the new threats to our gas supplies. In January, I actually said that this would be the year when we had to come together. People would want to come together when there's so much now that's been trying to divide, especially after last year's race referendum. We had to look for what united us and build respect again for the symbols and the institutions and rituals that remind us that we are or must be part of something bigger than us all. Australia. And today in Parliament we saw exactly that. And I want to thank the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. As I'll show you, this kind of thing could instantly make a real difference, which we saw in Parliament today. 2 weeks ago, I told you about the death of the only son of former Defence Minister Joel Fitzgibbon. Now, Lance Corporal Fitzgibbon, Jack Fitzgibbon, was a member of our Special Forces, and he died in a training accident at RAAF Base Richmond when his parachute didn't open properly. Now, on Monday, Albanese went to the funeral, as did Opposition Leader Peter Dutton and many MPs from both sides of politics. And today, Albanese paid tribute to Jack Fitzgibbon as his family, his dad, his mum and some soldier mates watched on. But this was a tribute not just to Jack, but to all Australians who volunteered to defend our country.
From the day he enlisted in 2014, Jack was proudly part of something bigger than himself. He was numbered among the extraordinary men and women who volunteer to serve in the Australian Defence Force and do our nation proud every single day. What they do is crucial to everything we hold dear as a nation and as a people. The choice to serve is both an act of courage and a profound expression of love for our country.
Peter Dutton struggled repeatedly to get through his own tribute.
Greater than the national loss is the profoundly personal loss. A dedicated father has lost his only son. A devoted mum has lost her only boy. A dear partner has lost her life's counterpart, and two sisters have lost their darling sibling.
It wasn't all tears, but it was all love.
In the wonderful tributes from his dad, his mum and his sisters, we saw photos there in the church. I've got to say, almost every one of them he had a beer in hand. Reminds me of another Fitzgibbon. That I know. It was a marvellous send-off from a family, from a defence force, from a community and from a nation that is proud of Jack Fitzgibbon.
And it was interesting to see, once politicians had been reminded of this greater thing that they serve, how the tone of Parliament instantly changed for the better, even if I have to report that it didn't last that much longer than what I'll show you. This was the first question after those speeches, and just listen to the tone, and there's no insults, there's no yelling.
Mr Speaker, it's hard to follow from what we've just heard, but my question is to the Treasurer. Since the election, the adult population has increased by over 1 million people. Meanwhile, home building completions are around a quarter of that. We are in a GDP per capita or family recession. The only thing left driving the economy is migration at a time when Labor's housing crisis is worsening. Why is this government taking our economy in the wrong direction?
I want to say this in a respectful way that reflects the respectful way that the Shadow Treasurer answered the question in the context today of the speeches that were given a moment ago.
You see what good is done when we do what is so rare now and remind ourselves of the good in this country, of the good of this country. But debate is still healthy because that does help us to get to the truth, and I do need to unspin the spin today. Today, the unemployment rate fell much more than was expected. It was a shock, actually. It plunged from 4.1% in January to just 3.7% last month. Treasurer Jim Chalmers was very happy.
More people are earning more, and more people will be keeping more of what they earn as well.
Now, low unemployment, I think, is just terrific. The fewer people who are out of work, well, that's actually a moral good. People busy, making their own future. That said, this fall virtually rules out the cut in interest rates that many economists were predicting quite soon, and a lot of Australians will probably be counting on really to help pay their bills. And there's something else about these figures. For a start, can you actually trust them? Because Macro Business, for instance, notes the number of job ads has dropped quite a bit lately. That's the line in red. And the number of people applying for each job has soared. That's the blue line, to 150 people for each ad. And second, how much of this jobs boom actually comes from the massive surge in immigrants, which does cost the rest of us, with wealth per person, for instance, actually falling, cities crowding. Today, new figures showed a massive jump in the already insane levels of migrants we've been sucking in, to nearly 550,000 a year. That is the equivalent of taking in enough people to fill 2 Hobarts, plus now 1 Rockhampton, when we're in a slump already in building the houses we need now. But we're not just failing to build enough houses, we're also not finding enough gas for our future, let alone creating enough electricity. Because of our global warming scare and all that green tape, the Australian energy market operator now warns that Victoria, which actually is stupid enough to ban onshore gas exploration and development for a decade, is now, big surprise, going to run out of gas supplies faster than it thought. We're going to lose about half the gas supplies for Victoria in 4 years, and urgent action is needed. For one, obviously, to get more supplies. But the head of gas giant Santos says that's being choked by legal activism. He said successive governments have failed to create an investment environment to allow that supply to come online and keep Australia's energy affordable. He said we have a couple of 100 years worth of supply for our liquid natural gas projects in Australia from the gas we have in the ground, but it is no use to anyone if it stays in the ground. And Santos would know, because it's had its planned giant gas field at Narrabri in New South Wales stalled by green tape for more than a decade. It's had a giant big offshore gas project in the seas north of Darwin held up by activist lawyers and Aborigines, claiming its pipeline would annoy the rainbow serpent. Oh, and the crocodile man. So yes, unemployment has fallen, and that's great. But are we working more for less? Joining me is regular Thursday guest, Barnaby Joyce, the Nationals frontbencher and former Deputy Prime Minister. Barnaby Joyce, it's great to see you. Look, it does seem crazy, you know. we've got record deposits of uranium, but we ban ourselves from using for energy. We have huge deposits of coal, but we're gradually banning that for our energy as well. We have huge deposits of gas, but we're restricting development of that, again, for our energy. I mean, what has happened to this country? Oh, and why didn't the coalition do something about it when you were in power?
Oh, well, it's a cult. We have a climate cult. That means there's no logic to it. It's just an unquestioning belief system. And this belief system comes at the expense. I mean, obviously, we're going to have swindle factories, wind farms, swindle factories, and solar factories and transmission lines. And that's something I've never supported. I've always said that you just don't shut down energy supplies unless you've got another energy supply that's better and cheaper than the one you're shutting down. And we don't. We don't have one. And of course, uranium, this perverse position we're in uranium, where in some states, you've got to know in other states they actually ban you mining it as well, even though even Greta Thunberg wants to use it. Greta Thunberg's a mad righty as far as Chris Bowen is concerned, a crazy right-wing bigot is Greta Thunberg compared to Mr. Bowen. But you can't, in other states, you can dig it up, that's moral. You can semi-process it, that's A-OK. You can take it through the middle of town, no problems there. Put it on a boat, fine. But you can't use it yourself because that's immoral. But it's all right because it gains morality as it goes across salt water on its way to Japan or to South Korea or to India. And now we're even talking about taking the rubbish and burying it back in Australia, but we can't use it here. Now, if you can show me how the logic behind that works, you're a better person than I am. And what are we harvesting out of this? What are the ashes in our mouth out of this? Out of our being tied to this mad cult? Our aluminium industry is shutting down. Our steel industry is basically only a fraction of what it used to be. We don't have a manufacturing industry of any sort, no car industry. Our plastics industry is about to go. Our cement industry is going. And we've got China breathing down our neck. Yeah, and I've got China breathing down our neck. And we say, but we'll be strong then. It'll happen. It'll be a miracle. It'll fall out of the sky. No, it is almost treacherous what is happening to Australia, because the only way we can defend ourselves is to be as strong as possible, as quickly as possible.
I'm listening to you, and you're talking about you're right about the cult, absolutely right. But while the coalition goes along with saying, yep, global warming really is a problem, yeah, and you can't say, oh, look, there's an existential crisis, terrible, but we're not going to do much about it. You have to go to the heart of it, as a film that I'm about to discuss later in the show will show. You've got to go to the heart of it and say, no, this is not a climate crisis. We are not facing great danger. The planet's warming slightly, but for all we know, that may actually be good. Until you do that, I don't know that you can kill the cult.
Well, we're all playing our part politically, Andrew, and we all have the certain rules and regulations and processes that we have to play within. But for my part, I'm clearly stating that if you are so selfish as to say, I've lived my life with all the freedoms, the rights, the liberties, the democracy, and that's A-OK, but to my children, I will hand a foot on their throat so they can live in sort of some quasi-vassal state, because, that they will be too weak to stand by themselves, then that is an incredibly selfish and also a treacherous thing to do to our nation. And you have to ask what is your priorities? What is the greatest fear? What is the greatest threat? And for my part, it ain't climate change.
Well, I got the hint about the restrictions you're under, having to toe the party line. But until that happens, I'm saying until politicians do call it out, I don't know how the coalition could win that argument long term. You were in the House for the tributes to Jack Fitzgibbon. Extremely moving, Barnaby.
Yeah, it is. And you see so much, don't you? Watch this and you see kids getting beaten up and, terrible things happening. And you get down on the chops, and then you see an incredibly honourable family. The Fitzgibbons are an honourable family. They have served our nation. Their son died for our nation. Good-looking, fit guy. And you can see mum and dad, their hearts are broken. The sisters, their hearts are broken. And look, nothing good can come of something as tragic as that, but it does at the same time draw us all together, and we say, look, this man just gave his life. He just gave his life, and we're all, yakking on and carrying on and focus on the main game, focus on what is important. And I do say a sense of honour, therefore, rests with that family. They become a family of honour. And if we can all imitate that in a small way, in whatever suburb, whatever street, whatever country town you're in, then this nation becomes a better and stronger place. And it works completely in the other direction to what I was formerly talking about and leaving this nation weak. You have more Jack Fitzgibbons and more Joel Fitzgibbons and more Diane Fitzgibbons and the Fitzgibbon family, then our nation will be a stronger, better place.
Proof that honouring the dead, honouring the sacrifice, honouring the service is so important because, as you say, it does remind us of something that unites us. And that's why Anzac Day and all those ceremonies, some of them have been under attack for so long, the flag and all these kinds of things, they are so important. And I know you've been at the front of this fight, Barnaby, Joyce, so thank you so much for that as well. Thank you for your time.
Always a pleasure, Andrew. Thank you.
Former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, after saying I wanted unity, what can you do? Former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, he's been scrambling in the last 24 hours to prove that he still could be a very good ambassador in Washington for Australia after Donald Trump warned yesterday that Rudd might have to pack his bags if Trump did become president after the November elections because of the terrible names that Rudd once called him, like a nut and the most destructive president in history.
I don't know much about him. I heard he was a little bit nasty. I hear he's not the brightest bulb, but I don't know much about him. But if he's at all hostile, he will not be there long.
Now, apparently to show that he can actually talk to politicians on the Republican side, Rudd today posted this picture of himself with the Republican Congressman Mike Gallagher, and I'm guessing Rudd is also the source who told the reporter in The Australian that Republican politicians yesterday, lots of them called him with support on the phone and noted that he previously posed with Greg Abbott, the Republican governor of Texas, and the Republican governor of South Dakota as well, both named as potential vice presidents if Republican Donald Trump is elected. Hint, hint, hint. Yet not one of his Republican friends has actually agreed to defend Rudd publicly, despite being asked by Adam Crichton of The Australian, among others. But to another former Labor Prime Minister causing the government grief, Paul Keating, huge supporter of the Chinese Communist dictatorship, yesterday held a 1-hour meeting in Sydney with China's Foreign Minister, Wang Yi. And looks to me like he was hiding his face as he was driven past the reporters outside. And I hope he was doing that out of shame at being used by China to try to divide the Albanese government. Joining me is Andrew Wallace, Deputy Chair of Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee and a Liberal MP. Andrew Wallace, thank you so much for your time. China's official Xinhua news agency has since reported on this meeting and says Keating told Wang that China enjoys a huge economy with extensive potential development, which poses no threat to other countries. In fact, China is conducive to peace. Keating, in his own statement on the meeting, doesn't say that, probably wisely. Instead, he said he talked history, while China's foreign minister was very positive about putting bilateral difficulties with Australia behind us, and he was encouraged by the Albanese government's efforts in restoring appropriate equilibrium between our two countries. Question for you. Keating seems to be a megaphone here for China, telling the Albanese government to play ball with this very nice and peaceful China, doesn't he?
Well, I think what you've identified there is, Paul Keating, should he have had that meeting? Why did he have the meeting? Now, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that Paul Keating is being used by the Chinese Communist Party here to drive a wedge between the left and the right of the Labor Party. The left of the Labor Party hate AUKUS, they hate the US-Australian alliance, and they're doing everything they can to drive a wedge between China, between Australia and the US. So I think that's really important to recognise. Now, as you said, I'm the Deputy Chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee, and all I can say is that Australia today in 2024 is very different to the Australia that Paul Keating led when he was Prime Minister. If Paul Keating was privy to the same classified briefings that I have, I can assure you he would not be a mouthpiece for the Chinese Communist Party.
Are you suggesting that China's hostility to Australia, we know, for instance, the cyber attacks and all that China's hostility to Australia is worse, more manifest than what we've been told so far?
Well, there's no doubt, absolutely no doubt, that the cyber attacks that are continuing to be made, not just by China, but by Russia, by North Korea, by Iran, against many countries in the Western world. But there's no doubt that China is trying to hoover up intellectual property from private companies, by public companies, or from public companies, from critical infrastructure in Australia and other Western countries, and the government, and in fact even the Parliament, where I'm sitting right here tonight. China has been instrumental in trying to interfere in the democratic processes of Western countries. It's certainly been active in interfering in Canada, in Lithuania, and Australia, of course, as well. They have tried to bring Australia to its knees economically in the not too distant past, and they realised that they spectacularly failed in doing that. And it appears to me that now that they want to get access to the CPTPP, that they've dumped that wolf warrior diplomacy, and they're now on a charm offensive.
Well, using former Labor Prime Minister against the current Labor Prime Minister, I just think that's outrageous interference in our politics. And shame on Paul Keating for lending himself to that, wittingly or not. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew Wallace. Really appreciate that. After the break, a new movie released just hours ago attacks the great global warming scare. It's going to cause a fuss, and I'll talk to the director of this movie after this. How often are you told by global warming alarmists that the scientists are all behind them, so people who don't believe global warming is a climate catastrophe that's going to destroy civilization? Well, they're just science deniers, aren't they? Well, enter Martin Durkin, who I'll talk to in a second. Durkin is an English television producer and director, has been a nightmare for the green religion because he keeps asking the questions that few dare, and keeps interviewing the experts who prove alarmists wrong. His film Against Nature in 1997 warned of the damage that the green movement was doing to development. That's when he first caught my attention. His film The Great Global Warming Swindle, which was a hoot, exposed some of the fakery and the shenanigans used to make global warming seem like, something all scientists agreed was an existential threat. That's the key, that it's a threat. Not that there's some warming, but that this is the threat. And today is the latest film, Climate the Movie, The Cold Truth, starring a scientist friend of mine, by the way, and other guests that have been on this show, is released on YouTube and other platforms. Here is some of it.
This is the story of how an eccentric environmental scare grew into a powerful global industry.
It's a wonderful business opportunity, okay? You want climate, we'll give you climate.
There's a huge amount of money involved. This is a huge, big money scam.
If CO2 isn't having the huge negative impacts that we claimed it was having originally, how are we going to stay in business?
A lot of people's livelihoods depend on it. They're not going to give that up.
This is a story of the corruption of science.
There's no such thing as a climate emergency happening on this planet now. There's no evidence of one.
That last guy was the former co-founder of Greenpeace. Joining me is the director, Martin Durkin. Martin, it's great to see you. Why did you make this movie?
Frustration. There are so many conversations where people would tell me that all of the science points in the same direction, and the world's coming to an end, blah blah. And no, it doesn't. Even their science does not support this notion that there's a great climate crisis. You can look at hurricanes, you can look at anything else. People, the weather men get on and say the hurricanes are getting worse. No, they're not. The IPCC itself says, hurricane activity has not increased in the past 100 years. Wildfires are not increasing. They say, wildfires are getting better. No, they're not. And not only that, you don't have to trust the people in my film. You can go and look it up yourself. One lovely trick I like to say is, why don't you, and people can do this at home, they can get on their phones and they can look up Earth's temperature 500 million years, click images, and see for themselves whether current temperatures are unprecedented, as we're often told. And they can see, are they much higher than they have been for 500 million years? Are they about in the middle, or are they very cold? We're very cold. We're in a very cold period at the moment. This is an ice age. Likewise with CO2. You can get on your phone and you can look up CO2 levels, 500 million years. Are they high? Are they in the middle? Are they very low? We have very low levels of CO2 at the moment. And so it goes on. Their science does not support this. And you can go on great websites for this. There's one called No Tricks Zone, tricks as in card tricks, with loads of science papers published in Nature, Science and the rest, which absolutely flies in the face of the climate alarm. And so after years of this, well, my God, there must be something else behind it. There must be politics. There must be something else behind it in order to explain why this consensus has taken place. And so that's why I made the film.
Let me do some footnotes as we go so people don't start freaking and doing complaints without having checked it. Our Bureau of Meteorology, for instance, records fewer and fewer severe cyclones in Australia over the last 50 years. If you want a look at cyclone damage, you look at Roger Pielke Jr., you look at Ryan Maui. If you want a look at temperature recently, yes, it has increased, so has global warming concentrations since the end of World War II. But really, longer history shows that perhaps this is not quite as terrible as people are saying. You have talked in your film to genuine climate experts. I recognise a few of them. A number of them have been on my show over the years about the global warming scare. Tell us about some of them that you interviewed and what they say.
Well, actually, for example, Professor Stephen Coonan, he was Provost and Vice President of Caltech and teaches at NYU. He's a physicist. And he's written a great book called Unsettled, which precisely does this, takes their data and shows that there really is no climate alarm at all. Temperatures actually have been, in recent times, been going up for the past 300 to 400 years. And, there's been absolutely, none of the temperature, the pattern of temperature variation in the past 200 years fits the narrative of CO2 driving temperature. And CO2 has never driven temperature in the past. We have great geological reconstructions of CO2 levels and temperature. Temperature has never been driven by CO2 in the past. So there's absolutely no reason to suppose that this trace gas is doing so at the moment. But there's Coonan, we've got Professor Will Happer, who is a professor of physics at Princeton. We've got John Clauser, who won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 2022. We've got Dick Lindzen, who's one of the great meteorologists of his generation. We've got Roy Spencer, who's largely responsible for all the satellite data on temperature. We've got piles of really great scientists, and they're sort of at their wits' end because they've been saying for some time really that the science doesn't stack up here. But if you say that, what's astonishing is the vitriol you get in return, both within the scientific community and outside the scientific community. And in a sense, that's what interested me most. What's the nature of the science doesn't stack up with this, and people can see for themselves. And I'd encourage people not to trust us, not to trust anyone else. Look it up yourself. We've got the internet these days, and you can look up proper papers and check this yourself. But if the science doesn't stack up, why then is this climate bandwagon what it is?
Yes, you talked to Professor Nir Shaviv as well, a friend of mine who is going to be releasing a really interesting paper on, I think, the effect of solar activity on temperature. And I actually asked Al Gore once, why is it that in previous ice ages coming out of it or whatever, you saw CO2 levels lag. First the temperature went up, then the carbon dioxide concentrations went up, although now it seems to be in reverse, and that's what's driving a lot of scientists to say, yes, CO2 is driving the temperature. But in the past, how do you explain that? The thing is, whether you think the temperature is increasing or not, and I think it is increasing, where is the damage, the danger that we've been told about? Because as you say, fewer cyclones, at least in Australia and around the world, there's no increase in overall activity, as Ryan Maui's pointed out. We're growing record levels of food around the globe. Where's the danger exactly?
Oh, I mean, temperatures have been increasing for 300 to 400 years, and they're still incredibly low by the normal standards of Earth. The longest instrumental temperature records from central England, and it shows about just over 1 degree Celsius warming since the end of the Little Ice Age, which was about the coldest period in the last 10,000 years. There is, we're cold. We could really do with it being a bit warmer, frankly. And there is, 1 degree Celsius, to put that in perspective, we do this in the program. There's been no temperature change overall in New York Central Park for the last 40 years. But from year to year, you can get 3 degrees Celsius difference in average temperatures, and no one will even notice. I mean, it is ridiculous. It's absurd to suggest that this is in any sense scary or almost meaningful. You look at the Central England temperature record, and actually warm temperatures have not risen over the past 340 years. It's cold temperatures that have come up slightly. So in other words, the temperatures are getting milder, not hotter. And that's something you find in many places in the world. In America, things were much hotter in the 1930s and 40s than they are now. It's all bollocks.
Yes, look, there are, again, a lot of scientists who disagree with you and point to this or that, but I mean, with the urban heat effect and all, I think we've got to listen to both sides of the debate. And you've uncovered very important scientists that go against what is called the consensus. Now, Martin, I'm going to say goodbye to you because I want to end with the excellent way that your film ends, and I want to play that. But it's so good, I want to end with that. So thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew.
Now, Martin Durkin's film ends with mentioning that signs of revolt. Maybe people are over the global warming scare. Farmers in Germany, farmers in France, farmers in Holland, for instance. The film ends very powerfully. Here it is.
Many working people are not merely sceptical, but positively angry about the climate alarm and all that flows from it. There is a suspicion, or perhaps realization, that climate change is an invented scare, driven by self-interest and snobbery, cynically promoted by a parasitic, publicly funded establishment hungry for ever more money and power. An assault on the freedom and prosperity of the rest of us.
Climate the Movie. It's called Climate the Movie. You can go and look it up now and watch it. Be nice to see the counter-argument at last for many of you, if you're not dedicated Sky News watchers, because we try to make the counter-argument all the time. After the break, Penny Wong told Israel, don't attack any hospitals in Gaza. Israel has ignored that and just did attack one. And guess what they found? Well, seems Wong was wrong. In a moment, how Israel just proved Penny Wong wrong. But first, here's a quick look at what's coming up on Shari.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, tonight we'll play freshly unearthed footage of Kevin Rudd calling on Republicans to remove Trump as president. I'm also going to be joined by a senior newspaper editor to speak about the night that Rudd humiliated George Bush. All of that coming up at 8 p.m.
There's been so much propaganda about Israel attacking hospitals in Gaza. In fact, Foreign Minister Penny Wong told Israel to stop it, to think of the civilians. Here she is.
We do call on Israel to cease the attacking of hospitals.
Now, the bad news for the Hamas terrorist group that runs Gaza is that Israel ignored Wong's demand and this week did attack the Al-Shifa hospital in northern Gaza after hearing that Hamas terrorists had regrouped there, using the patients as human shields. Now, Israeli troops have captured most of that hospital and found right next to the office of the hospital director 2 rooms with grenades and mortar shells and bullets and bundles of cash. Israel has also killed or captured a Hamas general there and the head of a kidnapping group that killed 3 Israeli teenagers in 2014. They've also killed 90 Hamas fighters in and around the hospital and arrested many more.
Until now, we have arrested over 250 Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists that we identified. We're still conducting an investigation on over another 350 people that we suspect that they are also connected to terror. Until now, none, civilians, doctors, medic teams, none have been hurt. Only the terrorists. But they are still hiding in this building, in the emergency room, exploiting and using the patients and the medic teams. This is Hamas.
That was posted by the IDF this morning. Joining me is General Jack Keane, a retired four-star general who served as Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army. He's now Chairman of the Institute for the Study of War. General Jack Keane, thank you so much indeed for your time. What does this Israeli attack on the Al-Shifa hospital tell you, particularly with a Hamas general killed, a kidnapper captured, many alleged Hamas operatives killed or captured as well?
Yeah, so this is in the northern part of Gaza, an area in Gaza City that the Israelis had cleared weeks and some months ago, to be frank about it. But elements of the Hamas have re-infiltrated into the area. And not surprising, the week before they began to occupy the Al-Shifa hospital tunnel complex, they were occupying a school. And the Israelis found themselves having to proceed in that area to get them out of there. The same thing happened in Al-Shifa. And as the Israelis approached the hospital to deal with Hamas, who was in the tunnel complex below it, they were immediately brought under fire. So there is no doubt that Hamas was there. It's propaganda to suggest that they were not, and the fact that the Israelis were just simply attacking an operating hospital. That's the last thing that they certainly want to do. But we know for a fact, and it's well documented, that Hamas uses schools, hospitals, and mosques to shield themselves, from the Israeli military forces, knowing full well that the Israelis are going to be much more careful conducting operations in and around those venues. And that's what happened here. Hamas was there, and that's why they had to go in there to deal with them.
Now, General Keane, there's just been a new poll released, a poll of Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank. It's by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, which is pretty well respected. To me, it suggests very strongly what Israel is up against and what many in the West, many journalists in particular, don't seem to appreciate. Even after everything that's happened since October the 7th, including the devastation of parts of Gaza, everything that's happened on October 7 when Hamas started this war by slaughtering 1,200 Jews, kidnapping about 250 people, and raping women, 71% of Palestinians polled say they still support that attack, and 81% of those who actually watched the video put out by Israel of the massacre, of families being slaughtered, of a beheading, they say, oh, there were no atrocities. 81% who saw that say, oh, no, there weren't any atrocities. And General, even more chilling for me is 64%, two-thirds of Palestinians still expect Hamas to win this war. Doesn't that tell you now that a ceasefire, if it was imposed today, would be a victory for Hamas?
Yeah, a permanent ceasefire for sure. That would certainly solidify the international worldwide condemnation of Israel. It would leave 5 to 6 battalions of Hamas fighters who are still effective, and most of the Hamas principal leaders. That would give them militarily the opportunity to rearm, regroup, and reorganize and reattack. That would mean military success for Hamas. And that is why the IDF's mission is to destroy the effectiveness of Hamas and their leaders so they cannot conduct another October the 7th attack. It's not very different than the mission the United States had to go into Afghanistan to make certain there was not another 9/11 from Afghanistan, and we were successful against that. The same mission has been given to the IDF. stop the effectiveness of Hamas, destroy them as much as possible, and prevent another attack. Any permanent ceasefire would establish Hamas as still an effective military organization capable of attacking again. And to your point about the Palestinians, there is significant suggestion here in the United States about a two-state solution with the Palestinians now, not months or years away in the future. And the Israelis are rejecting that summarily for the very reason you just pointed out, Andrew, that the overwhelming majority of the Palestinians are supporting the destruction of the state of Israel, the destruction of the Jews in Israel. How can you have a two-state solution when you have the other party having those fundamental beliefs?
General Jack Keane, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Yeah, great talking to you, Andrew, as always.
After the break, the panel and my tip of the week, whiskey that Johnny Depp actually just breathes in. Now straight to the panel. James McPherson of the Late Debate here on Sky News at 10 p.m. and Di Lee, the federal MP for the Western Sydney seat of Fowler. Di, I want to start with you because this show has really prompted something, a thought with me. You won your seat of Fowler off Labor with this 18% swing against it. And you have been mentored by a Labor giant, former ACTU President, Federal Labor MP Jenny George, a lovely woman, who gave an interview this month saying Labor had moved away from her with this green anti-worker extremism. And rather than keep her mouth shut, she decided to help mentor you. Can you tell us about your relationship and what it says about Labor today?
Oh, look, yes, hi, Andrew. Look, it was wonderful. I picked up the phone call in my Canberra office just soon after I got elected. And it happened to be Jenny George. And she said, I'm Jenny George. I want to speak to Di Lee. And I said, oh, it's me. And she goes, oh, my God, you picked up the phone. And she said, do you know who I am? I said, of course I know who you are. And I said, oh, my God. She goes, you know who I am? I said, yes. And so I was just in awe by the fact that she rang my office and we spoke and we struck a friendship over the phone since then, since I think around June 2022 when I was in Canberra. And yes, we have regular chats, regular text messages. She keeps an eye out on how I perform on media, and I'm sure she's probably watching your show tonight. I did message her to say I'm going to be on Andrew Bolt's tonight. And she actually, so agree with me on so many of the issues that I've raised since my election, which is around the cost of living. I've called on the government to extend the excise fuel tax cut because 46% of my population in Fowler drives a car. I've also called for the freezing of the HEX indexation because, of course, young people out here at the moment with the cost of living, the accumulation of debt, HEX debt means that once they get out and go to work, they will not be able to afford to do anything, buy a leasable, buy a house. So she has been a guide for me in terms of whenever I speak in the media to make sure, and she always reminds me, she said, listen, speak for your community, relate back to what your community is going through. And being a grassroots.
Well, I want to say hello. I want to say hello, Di. I want to say hello to Jenny George and say, look, Jenny, I know you keep refusing to come on, but I'm going to keep trying. But James, what interests me about this is that Jenny George has been writing letters to the Australian for a while, very good letters, pointing out that Labor's green religion, it's just destroying traditional Labor jobs in some seats. And the idea that this green revolution is going to, employ all these people it just isn't true. What do you think that her frustration with Labor, stopping paying her Labor dues, says about the party?
Well, one of the biggest problems is that for a party established to represent working people, it's astonishing how few people in the Labor Party have actually worked real jobs. You've got a lot of full-time professional political staffers, union hacks who then went straight into Parliament, and so they're steeped in ideology but lacking in real-world experience, and it shows in their policies, whether it's their energy policy, which affects people in the blue-collar areas who can't afford higher power bills, such as those in the the inner city perhaps can, whether it's immigration, because immigrants typically don't live in inner city suburbs. They go out into the outer suburbs and the regions, whether it's their attack on the Christian schooling, whether it's Labor's disdain for Australia Day and patriotism. Labor seems more intent on holding off Greens from winning inner city seats than they do representing blue-collar people. So I can well understand Jenny George's frustration. What I can't understand is why any working-class person would still vote for the Labor Party, because clearly they don't represent working-class people anymore.
Daly, how much of that do you agree with?
Look, I definitely think that the Labor Party is really disconnected from the community, the people that they used to represent, people such as Jenny George, and it's really, and I agree with those issues. I mean, electricity prices, as you know, have gone up and continue to rise, and I don't believe for a moment that they said this week it's going to go down. It's not going to go down, and we know that. So I think that their energy policy is really need to address, because the majority of working Australians are not benefiting at all from the policies that the Labor Party is pushing through at the moment in Parliament.
It's weird, isn't it, James? It's like it represents a whole new constituency, while the Liberal Party is now increasingly pitching to battlers around the big end of town.
Yeah, I mean, the Liberal Party have always been associated with big business, but these days, I mean, if you drive a ute, you're not going to vote for Labor. They're going to push you into an expensive EV that you can't afford. You're going to vote the Liberal Party. Who would have ever guessed the Liberal Party will represent, tradies driving utes?
Look, that is so strange. Meanwhile, one other Labor policy is, I think, putting stress on working class suburbs. Immigration, 550,000 people now imported in 1 year, when we're not building enough houses for those already here.
Yeah, look, I think that, as a refugee, I believe that, Australia was, the migrants, a lot of migrants built the country, and in my community in particular, 70% of population are born overseas or have two parents born overseas. So I appreciate the contribution that migrants have made. However, I think government policies have really failed us and failed Australians, in the sense that when it comes to availability of housing, availability of infrastructure even. I don't know if you know this, Andrew, but out of the 12,000 refugee settlement over the last 5-6 years into Australia, 10,000 were resettled here in Fowler, which includes Fairfield City Council and Liverpool City Council. 10,000 out of 12,000. And yet there's exactly no infrastructure investment. Our hospital is just
That's the point, Daly. That is the point. You can't import that many people. Look, I've got to stop. I've got to go. Daly, James McPherson, thank you so much to you both. Haven't got much time to take it from me, but look, this is the whiskey that Johnny Depp says he doesn't drink. He doesn't drink anymore. But Lagavulin 16 years is important. It is so smoky and peaty, but also merged with, it's so rounded with sherry and all that. This is a classic. And the book that I'm doing, because I'm doing a bit of cooking, Rick Stein, lovely bloke, great cookbook, Mediterranean Escapes. Of all the cookbooks, I use this one the most. You can see it from the food stains. Go to Robinson's Bookshop, order it from there. Don't have time to explain this. That's next time. But coming up now, Sharry Markson.